So I'm in Spain and I brought you, oh look, there's rabbits down there. I brought you to this dry river valley many times before in previous videos. I'm here in June and it's the middle of June and it's way too hot to be out here during the day for any amount of time, which is a shame because there is a little bit of foraging to be done at this time of year. There might be figs on these trees, or not necessarily these trees because I think these trees belong to people, but there might be figs on some of the wild growing trees up around there. Don't know if we're going to get to them today, but there is another plant I want to look at, which is capers. So the sun's actually gone down behind the hill behind me, and I'm now in this little shady valley, and things have cooled down a little bit, so I've got a half an hour before we lose the light to have a little wander around, see if we can find something I'm particularly looking for. In fact, I think I might see it over there. I'm going to head down there first because I think that's the plant I'm looking for, which is capers. As I suspected from afar, these bushes growing out of this is an artificial cliff, this is a cutting, but this plant is Capparis spinosa. It is the caper bush, and this is the source of both capers and caper berries. In fact, I can see both things on here. So we might even get to pickle some caper berries. I don't know actually what's involved in doing that, so I will have to look that up. But anyway, this is the flower of the caper plant. We need to be a little bit careful with this plant for two reasons. One is it earns its name. It's called Capparis spinosa, which means spiny. And in each of these little nodes here, it has spines. So if you just go and stick your hand in there, you're going to get prickled. The other thing about this plant is it's very often patrolled by little ants that have quite a fierce bite. I can't see any on here, but in previous encounters with this plant, I have just touched it and found suddenly my hand is swarming with ants. So we do need to be careful. Anyway, so what are capers? Well, capers are these things. These are the unopened flower buds of the capers. They open to this beautiful flower, which is actually highly scented. I'm going to get my nose in there and have a sniff and tell you what I think it smells like. So similar to sweet peas. It's very, very fragrant, very potent, sweet scent. So anyway, these unopened buds here, if they're pickled or brined, will turn into capers, and that's all that capers are, is these unopened flower buds. Caper berries are the fruit that follows this flower, and there's one of them there. In fact, there's several of them there. There we go, caper berries. And those can also be pickled and eaten. So in today's video, at the very least, I'm going to pick a load of these caper buds, pack them in salt, and they're coming home with me back to England. They take about a month to cure if they're packed in salt. There are different ways of brining them. They can be lacto fermented, but I'm going to pack them in dry salt because that's probably the most transportable way of preserving them. I will look up what happens with the caper berries. I have a feeling these need to be probably pickled in hot vinegar or something like that, so I don't think we'll be doing that on this trip. But anyway, there is the caper plant. Big, spiny, shrubby bush, and there is an abundance of flower buds on here, so this one plant will probably supply sufficient buds for my capers, you could say. There's another smaller bush here, same species, and again lots of these flower buds on there, so we're not going to have a problem finding enough buds to make it worthwhile pickling them. So it's possible to spot caper bushes from quite a distance because they're one of the greenest things at this time of year. So that's a caper bush here growing in amongst these rocks, and they've got a sort of bluey green foliage. It does stand out quite a bit against the background. There are other bluey green things, but I can see another caper bush over there, for example, and actually another one up there. So yeah, not difficult to spot at a distance. There is one plant you might mistake for capers. There is a kind of shrubby pea plant, which I'll show you in a minute, which has got similar foliage. The bush looks similar. The plant itself is unrelated, and you wouldn't make the mistake because it doesn't have the same kind of buds. So this is the plant that, at least in this area, you might most commonly mistake for capers. It's a quite similar looking plant, not related. This is a legume. This is called the Syrian bean caper. It doesn't have those big showy pale lilac flowers, and it doesn't have the caper berries. These are the pods here, and you can see the little pea pods. I'm not sure about the edibility of this one. It is called the bean caper, so maybe it's eaten in the same way. Don't know. I'll look that up and I'll put some information on the screen. These though are the true capers. So this is the plant we looked at last night. It's early in the morning, so it's still, well, I'm in the shade here. So it turns out that the caper berries can be cured in the same way as, that's interesting, I've just noticed there's a little thorn on the end of the leaves as well. Just on the tip of the leaf there's a little hook. Must be to help it climb. But yeah, anyway, so these caper berries can be cured in the same way as the caper buds. So I'll be picking some of those, and we will attempt to cure caper berries as well. We'll do two different things. So picking the capers is going to be something I'd probably need 3 hands to record properly, but approximately the same level of ease or difficulty picking caper buds as it is picking blackberries, and interestingly the same general level of peril to your skin. These things are thorny, and so in picking these sometimes you'll catch yourself on those little backward facing spines that are underneath the leaf nodes there. And as I say, they've got a little pointy hook on the end of the leaves as well. But yeah, it doesn't take long to pick a quantity of those. I'll keep going. So that's all of the buds I can reasonably reach on this one plant here. Probably I need about that many again, so I'll find another plant in a minute. So now I'm going to pick some berries. So I'm just thinking, I've eaten caper berries before. They're not usually as big as that. They're usually about that size. So those are the ones I'm going to pick. Interesting insect there, looks a little bit hostile. I'll just steer clear of that. Yeah, I may be mistaken, but I'm judging that that fly looks a bit bitey. So we'll just be cautious of that. Alright, so that's about enough from here, I think. So I've got a decent amount of caper berries, quite quick to pick those because they are just that much bigger. Interesting collection of eggs on the leaf up here. It looks like maybe those are the little nymphs of some sort of hemipteran bug. But that's just a reminder really to think about the fact that we're not the only ones taking something from this plant. So I'm going to leave some for nature. There's plenty of buds and berries and flowers unpicked on this plant. We're going to leave some for nature because there are more plants. I can spread my picking across multiple plants. Standing here next to this plant in the morning with all these open flowers, I'd like to update my impression of the scent of these blooms. It is like sweet peas, but there's a lot of other complexities in there. There's a little bit of kind of jasmine, and there's a little bit of zest, like lemon zest, citrusy sort of a fragrance as well. So quite a complex perfume, but really lovely. And where I'm standing here in the shelter, this little area is infused with it. I'm enjoying this. So there's another fine looking caper bush in there, but not a chance of getting in there with all these distaff thistles and other thorny things. So we're just gonna have to leave that one. That is not capers, that's the bean caper bush. Okay, here's another one, but this one's in full sun, so we will have to just be careful for that ant problem. Not a problem for the ants, it's a problem for me. So I'm just going to pick a few more buds from this one. Probably got just about enough. Okay, I found another really good bush here, lots of nice little buds. And this is probably going to be the last one I pick from. My harvest this morning is limited not by the abundance of these caper buds, but rather my endurance in the hot sun. It's probably about 9 o'clock now. The sun is beginning to feel a little bit burny. So yeah, my harvest of capers is going to be limited not by what I can actually pick, but by how long I can survive out here in the sunshine. being a pasty old Brit. The buds, when they're picked, a little bit of resinous sap comes out to the bottom, and that's like a sticky sap. These will need to be cured before they can be eaten. If we tried to eat one now, and I'm not going to do that, I'm not that kind of YouTuber, but if we tried to eat one now, they would be inedibly bitter. I don't think they'd be actually toxic, but they just wouldn't be good to eat. So what we need to do is cure them in salt, which will draw out the bitterness and transform them into the ingredient that I'm actually quite familiar with, but I've never pickled from fresh myself. Right, that's going to be it. I think there's plenty more I could pick here, but it's getting too hot. So we got a useful harvest there of both caper buds and caper berries. Let's get these back to La Cabaña del Camarón and see what we can do with them. Okay, so these capers, just going to give them a good rinse. Interesting, they're hydrophobic, they're not actually wetting. That is interesting. They're covered in like a waxy powder. Anyway, this will wash the dust off them. And then I'm just going to spread those out on a plate and leave them out to dry, just to dry the moisture off them. Caper berries, second verse, same as the first. Again, I'll just put them on a plate to dry. So while those are drying out, I just need to go and find some coarse grained salt and a couple of suitable vessels to cure these in. So curing these capers and caper berries really couldn't be simpler. I'm using a dry brining method. So all we do is, I've got some coarse sea salt here. We put a little bit of that in the jar. We put some capers in. We put some more salt in. And we're aiming for about the same volume of salt as capers. Really, we're just looking for an abundance of salt, because what will happen here is this salt will draw the moisture and the bitterness out of these capers. It'll create a brine. We'll tip off any excess liquid and add more salt if required, and it will create a brine, and that will cure them. Slightly easier with two hands. Capers, salt, capers, salt, and so on. So, lid on that one, and we'll just put that aside somewhere. Same deal with the caper berries, except for these, I'm just going to trim off about half the stalk, leave about that much. And these caper berries do get as big as a golf ball, but I don't think you can pickle them once they get that big. I think it would be a problem for the actual curing or pickling process to get into the middle of them. Okay, the berries are tending to ride up on top of the salt here, so what I'm going to do is put all of the berries in and then pour the salt in, and it'll fill the voids in between them. These will take about a month to cure, so I will be back in England before that happens. So these are coming back with me to England. Now, you may have concerns about transportation of plant material and foodstuffs. Rather than go over all of that again, I'll link in the video description and in this card to a video where I picked wild thyme in Spain, and I went through all of the legal and safety matters regarding plant materials and foodstuffs. Anyway, so we're just going to bury those in salt,
Same as we did with the capers. Lid on, clear up this mess and leave that for a few days. Every few days I'm going to give that a shake, pour off any brine, add some more salt. So we just need to make sure that those are kind of left alone really for the next couple of days. Something like that.
It's evening and it's now cool enough for me to go out again. There's a bit of space in my jars, so I'm going to go out and pick some more capers and some more caper berries. I saw a lot of rabbits running away from me. See if we can see a few this evening. There's one. Look at it go. There's another one down there on the track. I think there was, yeah, there's one there, just broke cover and right by my feet. Rabbits are widely sought after game animals in southern Spain. They're hunted and quite highly prized as game. Got one here, yeah, there's one. Look at them go. So yeah, lots of rabbits about. Now I mentioned earlier in the video that capers are quite easy to spot because the plants are green when everything else is dead. I neglected to mention why that is. And the reason for that is that these plants have very, very deep roots. So the root system for this plant here, big sprawling caper bush, the root system for this plant may go down as deep as 10 meters into the ground to find moisture. And so some of the other plants just aren't that deep rooted, and probably the ones that look around that look greener are the ones with deeper roots. The capers for certain have got like a 9-10 meter deep root system. So this other plant, the Syrian bean caper, these are the flowers here. Not much to look at. These are the fruits, these little pods. The young shoots, flower buds, and I think immature fruits of this plant are sometimes pickled in a similar manner to capers and eaten. I'm not going to be doing that because there are some health risks. There are some alkaloids and things in this plant that aren't particularly good to eat. It's a plant in the bean family. A lot of members of the bean family, apart from the ones that we are familiar with eating, are actually quite toxic. But yeah, capers, true capers, not in the same family. Anyway, that's the flowers, and they are truly beautiful. And actually the evening time is the best time to appreciate the scent. So down here in the evening, it's a really intoxicating scent. In the morning, it's transformed into a very pleasant but slightly different fragrance. So it seems like maybe the fragrance changes as the night goes on. Certainly in the morning it was like sweet peas and lemon. This evening it's like sweet peas, jasmine and tropical blooms. Anyway, got some more capers and caper berries, hopefully enough to top up my jar.
So 24 hours in after starting these capers off, well, capers and caper berries, we can see there is moisture starting to develop. There's moisture being drawn out of the capers here by the salt. All I need to do is every day just give them a little shake upside down like that, put it back down. If we get to the point where there's actual liquid in there, I'll pour it off, add some more salt. Just need to keep on probably doing this every couple of days now for the next month. So it's been about a week since I started these, but I've got to pack them up now. So the next time we see these jars, they're going to be in my kitchen in England. All right, and here is that. We're back in England, and these are now going to stay here until they're fully preserved. They've got about another 3 weeks of curing, probably. So how did I get these home? I double bagged them in resealable bags, and I put them inside my walking boots for extra padding, and jammed them in there, laced them up so that they wouldn't get shaken around, and that would protect them from impact during baggage handling. So capers, caper berries. Now, just thinking about this, it's very unlikely that I'm going to end up with a product that's better than commercial capers here, because this is the first time I'm doing this, and I would be competing against hundreds of years of tradition and refinement. So this is just me bodging it. But I still think it's a worthwhile project. I've undoubtedly used too much salt. And as a result, these capers are going to be far more costly than if I'd just gone and bought them in the shops. In fact, I saw capers and caper berries in the shops in Spain, and they're really cheap. So this is not a process that's going to be economical, but it is interesting because obviously this is the first time I've tried preserving these. Oh, by the way, the sheet of plastic I've got in here, I had cling film in there when I was in Spain. I've replaced that with a tougher sheet of polythene. The reason for that is just that when I shake it, I don't want the salt abrading the seal on the jar and rusting the lid. Anyway, got to shake them every day. But we can see there is definitely moisture evolving in there. I should mention the smell. The smell, they do smell like capers now. They do smell resinous and complex. Yeah, the bud's even more so, I would say. Anyway, yeah. Some amount of shaking just to make sure that the salt is properly distributed and make sure that they're all getting in contact and moved around, and then left alone. I did bring the rest of the bag of salt home with me, so I've got the same kind of salt to add if I need to, but I've got a feeling we've got enough salt in there already. I think that's probably going to be the end of this segment of the video, so we'll probably now just cut to when they're finished. It's now been more or less a month since I put these capers in salt in Spain. I think it's actually time to open them up and see what's going on. Before we do, we can actually see there is some liquid now in the bottom of the caper berries. So the salt has drawn that liquid out. I need to tip that off and probably repack these in fresh salt. Similarly, the capers, not so wet, but they are looking quite moist. The salt has drawn out the moisture. You can see there's some discoloration of the salt here as well. That's the juices that have come out of the capers. I'm going to repack these in fresh salt. I think probably the way to do that is with this colander. The holes in here should be big enough to let the salt through, but not any of the stuff I want to keep. So, well, it smells exactly as I expected it should. It does smell like the capers you buy in the shops. Yeah, the salt is coming through. It might be just as easy just to wash out that jar, dry it, and actually pick these caper berries out and just pack them in some fresh salt. I don't think I need to use quite as much salt as this next time. So jar washed out and dried, and to make the management of the salt a bit easier, I think we'll decant a bit of it into that container. Okay. So yeah, they're looking very different to what they were like when they went in the jar. And I don't think there's any point in trying to layer them. I think the thing is just get all of the caper berries in there, and then I'll toss some salt in there and shake them up a bit. Dry brining like this will produce a really, really salty product, obviously. And so, whereas normal capers or caper berries in a jar of brine, you would expect to be able to just use them straight out the jar. These will probably have to be rinsed, possibly soaked, before use. They feel quite hard to the tongs here, but that may be normal. Right, there we go. That's all my caper berries. We're just going to have a quantity of fresh salt, not nearly as much as I had before. Lid back on. I'll just give them a shake up. In reality, that's probably as much salt as I should have used when I made them the first time round. That can now go in the fridge because those are done. Same thing with the capers. So yeah, we can see the salt has got some moisture in it and it's got some discoloration. That's the stuff that's been drawn out of the capers, which is what we desired to do. So I've done this as a two-stage process. I shook them, brought them to the top, scooped them out, put them in the jar. Then I was able to shake all of the remaining salt through the colander and clean it out. I've put them back in there, and now if I give them another shake, that's shaking even more salt off of them, just because there's no big clump of salt at the bottom of the colander. So now those will go back in the jar, and we will taste these in a minute. They're looking a lot like I would expect capers to look, and it does occur to me. So back in spring, I pickled some garlic buds, garlic scapes, which I called scapers. I did that by lacto fermentation, but it might be interesting next year to dry brine some like this. Anyway, fresh salt, and again, not so much of it this time. Lid back on, give that a good shake so they're all in contact with the salt. And there we go. So that's dry brined capers and caper berries, pretty much ready to try tasting now. All right, so first little taste of these capers and caper berries is going to be as they come. I'll brush the salt off. I'm expecting that this might not be tremendously pleasant because that's not what you're meant to do. However, we'll give it a go. I'm just going to brush the salt off of that caper berry. It looks like it should. It is actually slightly softened, and I'm just going to brush the salt off a caper as well. So caper berry cross section looks like that. Caper cross section, that's going to be a bit more tricky, but that looks like that. And that looks like a perfect normal caper. So taste the caper first. Very, very salty, as expected. Very, very prominent and strong caper aroma. Possibly the most intensely flavoured caper I've ever tasted. So good, yeah. I don't think that's because I've done anything particularly special or because these capers are particularly special. They are just wild capers. But I think probably the dry brining process is what's made those so intense. So likewise, I'm just going to taste a little bit of this caper berry. Wow, exceptionally salty, but very well flavoured. But the good thing is that does mean the salt has penetrated the thing and preserved it. So I'm going to put a few capers in some plain water to soak, and then I'll think of something to have with that for my lunch. So here's what that's going to be. First, I'm just going to get my capers out and just pat them dry on a piece of kitchen paper towel. Actually, what I might just do is taste one of these now and see if soaking it's actually helped. Oh yeah. Still salty and still really powerfully flavoured, but sweet as well. So nice ancient grain bread roll, a bit of butter, some lovely Scottish smoked salmon, which I've just shredded, just torn up to make it, well, so it doesn't all come off in one bite. A little bit of cottage cheese, and capers. Now I am going to just chop these, just maybe chop them so that each one is at least in half, just to make them a bit easier to apply. Seafood and capers, obviously a bit of a classic pairing. Really very good. And it's easy to understand why capers are so often paired with seafood like this. The salty tang of the capers just perfectly seasons the fish, but also those resinous and complex, slightly bitter and aromatic flavours just lift the whole thing to just a completely new level. While we're here, I will just taste this little bit of caperberry that's been soaked. Still really salty again, but again, nicer for that soaking and tastes great. The flavour's very similar to capers, in fact, but there are subtle differences. The berries are maybe a little bit more nutty in flavour. Just to finish up, I've got some of my caper berries, which I've had soaking in a glass of water for about an hour. I think we'll have a little bit of cheese, some Somerset red, a bit of manchego, seems appropriate since we're dealing with capers that came from Spain, some peppered cured sausage, nice apricot, some little tomatoes, a few rosemary crackers, a little bit of this excellent Devon chutney. This is onion and pineapple, and my caper berries. How about that for a nice little lunch? But I think the thing to do is probably just taste one of these now with a bit of cheese. And again, it really elevates the food that you have it with. It's not just the salt, it's the whole complex flavour. And they are complex in the same way that olives are. It is a different flavour, but I think probably if you like olives, you might like these. And I think if you don't like olives, you probably wouldn't like these. So that was my capers and caper berries. This is my conclusion. That was the end-to-end process for dry curing capers and caper berries. I've enjoyed that process, including the waiting, and I'm happy with the end result. Would I do this again? I'm not sure. I think I like capers better than I like caper berries. This was not an economical exercise. I didn't save money by doing this. However, I do think these capers are possibly the best capers I've ever tasted. So it was well worth it in that respect. I don't know if that's just because they are relatively fresh. Just a little over a month ago, these were still growing on the plant. That's not guaranteed to be the case with the jar of capers you buy on the supermarket shelf. But it may also be this dry curing process that has preserved and intensified the caper aroma. Anyway, interesting experiment. I'm glad it worked. And that was the process for making capers and caper berries. I hope that's been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.